Hey everyone. No, this isn't Tim Austin, but it is his podcast. My name is Mark Ross, and I have been a guest on Tim's podcast, Navigate, and this would be an interesting time for us to flip the table where I'm going to actually be the host for this podcast and interview Tim Austin. So I hope that you enjoy this. I suspect that you really will. And as a reminder, Tim started this podcast a couple of years ago when he had this deep desire to move forward, and his wife, Eve, helped coax that out of him to help resource people like yourselves listening today that are going through changes in life, transitions, and the growth that we can experience through these transformations. Tim offers the tools and the stories and the episodes that help us all to move forward in life for where we believe that the Lord is calling us. So welcome to your podcast, Tim.
Mark, it's really great to be back in this space. But like you said, with the tables turned, and we're with you as our host today. So thanks for your willingness to come in and do this.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm very curious.
So am I.
Let's reach back. What was Tim Austin like as a kid?
I had a pretty good growing up life, as a young kid. My dad was a businessman, did pretty well for himself. There's 4 kids in the family. I'm the youngest of 4. There's just enough space between us as the kids, 3 boys, one girl. There was just enough space between us that we weren't really close growing up. Most of the time, we just kind of had our own things going and did our own things. So there wasn't a lot of deep connection in our family, really. But growing up, I learned to just love being outdoors. We lived by a park in Northern California. Chico, California is my hometown. So we lived by this big park. We lived close to the creek. I took up fishing, and you would on at least, 4 or 5 days out of the week, I'd be, fishing pole in hand with my dog off the leash, going up and down the creek fishing, or taking my pellet gun out and shooting with my dog or something. Just it was a good place to live. It was a good, it was a good life. I think that I missed out on a lot of opportunity to connect with friends because I am introverted in a lot of ways. I'm an introvert. And so I think that I missed out on things like where I could have been very naturally good at because of just the way I'm built. But so people always thought I was, a basketball player, or I played sports just because of the way I was built. But I never really connected in sports and in that area of extracurricular things that were offered through school. And so I was the type you would see me with 1 or 2 close buddies, and they would be my hunting and fishing buddies, and we do everything together. And I didn't branch out too much from there. But overall, it was a great, being who I am and how I'm wired, I have no complaints. But other than that, I think I could have gone deeper with some friendships and had some things like high school reunions that I wouldn't be afraid to go to because I didn't know anybody, that kind of thing.
Wow. In knowing you today, you still have that outdoor curiosity and love for nature. And then the fact that you've lived in other parts of the world with your family is just an amazing thing. So the things we do as a kid often carry over into our adulthood. So thanks for sharing that, Tim. I know that you and Eve have been married for, I think, 30 years now, if I did the math correctly. Where did you guys meet?
Yeah, so actually we both were born and raised in Chico, California. And I guess you'd say we met as teenagers initially. My parents moved us as kids from one church to another when I was early teens, mainly because they wanted us to go to a church where there were more youth and more opportunities for me to get involved. And so at that new church where we ended up, my wife was there, and her family was plugged in and very involved there. And so that would have been the first time we met, but that wasn't the start of this amazing story of marriage and life together, because it was kind of just brief encounters, from time to time. And then later in my teen years, I began to kind of wander off, doing my own thing, wandered from the church and church life. And I was just searching, and just lost in a lot of ways. And it wasn't until I was 20, and this was after, so I had graduated from high school. I spent a year kind of just working with my brother. Again, we come from a furniture business family. So he wanted to start a furniture business and I connected with him, and that was what I did after high school, but that wasn't long-term for me. I just knew something was ahead. And I always, going back to my desire for my love for the outdoors, I always wanted to do something outdoors. And I thought how that would be, I started to thinking about vocation and profession. I thought about, wildlife management or forest service, different things that I could be outdoors. And so I joined the Conservation Corps when I was 20, California Conservation Corps. And the motto for the California Conservation Corps at that time was hard work, low pay, miserable conditions. So I think in some ways that prepared me for the mission field. And I joined up with the Corps and spent a year doing that. But during that year is when God really met me. I was based in the California Redwoods at one of the Corps bases there. And I was driving through the Redwoods in my car all by myself. And all I can say is that the Lord just really met me in that place. And this is a long story to answer your question. It came back to me going back to my leaving the Corps eventually and going back to my hometown, where I got plugged back into my church. And at that time began to think about what God was calling me to do, not just what I wanted to do. And so my wife and I, it was interesting because my wife and I both, I was part of the young adults group there at the church, and she was still in high school, but it came after about a year there at the church, I went off to Bible college, and there just happened to be about 7 or 8 of us from that one church who all went off to Bible college at the same time. And it happened. And that was myself and my wife, Eve, included in that group. And so we go off to Bible college in Scotts Valley. It's Santa Cruz area of California. We go off to Bible college. And so for several years, we're there, but again, we're not connecting. My wife, Eve and I, we're not connecting in hardly any way. We have our own kind of group of friends and doing our own thing. She was in sports. I was into other things. And so it wasn't until, but I must say I did observe from afar, and it wasn't until my my last year of Bible college, when I was getting ready to graduate, that I asked her to the junior, senior banquet. They didn't call them proms in Bible school. They called them at that time junior, senior banquets. And so I asked her to be my date for that. And that is really when this journey began together.
Wow, the journey. And you
Yes.
talk about different journeys in different seasons of life. And
yes. And that journey, by the way, Mark, could have never happened because, apart from the grace of God, because I remember our first date together. We went, I think I took her bowling and out to dinner, and then we started talking and having this conversation about what we felt like God was calling us to do, where we were feeling led to go. It was, I'm getting ready to graduate and everything. So, but she was the first to say, I want to be a single missionary. The Lord is leading me to be a single missionary. And I gave a great comeback line to her. And I said, well, I think I'm supposed to be a single missionary too. and it truly was that God was leading us in those directions, and those same directions, unbeknownst to us, he had a plan for both of us so we tell that story and we say God always had a plan for us to be single missionaries together.
Great story. Love it. Wow. Your podcast and your life is centered so much on navigating change, and God's gifted you to help others to do the same thing, to transform in character formation. What was it like moving out of this country, your Chico, California roots, all the familiarity, the redwoods that you loved, the outdoors that you loved, and now you're in a brand new part of the world with a brand new calling and a brand new wife? And how did you navigate all that?
Yeah, just going back a little bit to, we use different terms related to this, calling, vocation, but going back to that, shortly after I came back to the Lord, Mark, and began to really pursue his call on my life, I picked up a book called Shadow of the Almighty. I don't even know where I found it. It might have been in our church library or something, but it's the story of martyred missionary Jim Elliot, as told by his widowed wife Elizabeth Elliot, and how he was a missionary in Ecuador and was killed by the very people he went to reach. And that really gripped me. Not that I had this great desire to be a martyr, but the story of obedience and sacrifice really gripped me. And I think that just planted a deep seed in my heart at a early time of my life with God, that this is what he was leading me down this path. And I ended up doing an internship in Ecuador during my Bible college years for a summer. But it's interesting, we never ended up in Ecuador. We ended up in Central Asia. But that internship and that exposure to the world of overseas cross-cultural work was very instrumental in just continuing to lead me down that path. But to actually leave our roots, my roots in this little Northern California town, to be honest, it wasn't that hard. And I think some of it, I think it was harder for my wife because she came from a very close-knit family. They were very close. I think for me, I'm the fourth child. My parents were used to, sending us off and saying goodbye and all that stuff. So I think there wasn't a lot holding me back. And actually then, we'd already left California at that point when we were preparing for the mission field, because we had moved from California to Denver, Colorado, so I could go to seminary. And I was doing seminary. My wife was teaching at our local church there in Colorado at the Christian school there. So we were already unplugged for several years out of our California roots in Colorado. And that was an adventure for us. And so I think how the Lord wired both of us was for adventure, and we had a lot of things in our favor, like we were not deep into our careers. We were young marrieds. We're not deep into our careers and into debt. We had an excitement. We had a sense of calling and adventure that propelled us forward. There were some cons around that too, though. I mean, we were very young and we lacked the experience. I think in some ways, I glamorized the call so much that I had a lot of unmet expectations when I actually landed in Central Asia, which I had to deal with. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think some of that was easy, some of it was hard.
That covered a long span of years with your assignments overseas. And we really want to dial this podcast before we conclude today about some recent changes that you've been going through. But before we leave that special time, is there a particular story that comes to mind that was memorable and yet a great example of what it's like to navigate maybe an unplanned expectation? You mentioned expectations. It wasn't quite what you expected, but I know there are planned transitions and a lot of unplanned transitions, and how you dealt with that. Any story that surfaces for you, Tim?
the story that immediately comes to mind is just when we landed in Central Asia for the very first time, and we we were anxious to get there. Like I said, we were propelled by this sense of calling and adventure, and so we ended up missing out on Thanksgiving celebrations with our family back in California because we wanted so bad to get to the field. And so we landed in Central Asia on Thanksgiving Day of '96. And we land there and we're exhausted from the trip. It was actually several days of travel with a stop in another country. And so we were just super tired from the journey. And the people who picked us up from the airport and dropped us at this little apartment. It was kind of a guest apartment of the humanitarian organization that we were going to be working with. And they're in this apartment. We just crashed, and we look around us, and we have our first child, our daughter, with us. She's just a baby, and we have our baby with us, and we're looking around this apartment. It's bare bones. It's we could see, whatever they were, mice or rat droppings on the floor. We're not. What are we doing here on Thanksgiving Day? We could be, doing, celebrating with our family. So there was an unmet expectation in itself. Like, wow, we didn't land like we really thought we would, And so they just dropped us off at the apartment. We found some ramen noodles, and we boiled some water and had our ramen noodles on that day. I think we were crying in our ramen noodles, just what did we get ourselves into here as we watched a little mouse creep across the floor.
Oh man. Wow. The turkey ramen noodle meal. Well,
that's right. Yeah.
Man. And I'm sure there were countless stories of unexpected surprises and events. And we all know in the Christian context of spiritual warfare and things that go on there as well. I don't want to dishonor all that time, but curious at these forks in the road, these crossroads, long time overseas and connection back home, back and forth. But what was it like when you and Eve began to sense it's time to come back to the mainland? It's time to go back to America. How did that unfold?
Yeah, that kind of knowing or sensing a new direction for us, it came in stages. And I think there's and this is not something I knew beforehand, but there are stages of transition, and the Lord, through these stages of transition, is preparing us to let go. And so for me, I think that there was a season of letting go, and that signaled that transition was looming. It was on the way. It was unfolding before me. And so the season of letting go really began while we were still in our first Central Asian country, where we spent 15 years serving. It came at the tail end of that time, to where it was just this sense of that God has something new for us, something different. Our hearts are drawn to some other areas, and we begin to let go in terms of some of our the projects and areas that we were focused on, letting go of those and handing them off to other people. Just in the last couple years there, just in the whole way we were approaching life and ministry was in that kind of this is not forever anymore. This is temporary. This is getting down to just 1 or 2 more years, and then we're going to be going. So how are we going to transition well? So that was part of it. But I think we didn't leave there and go straight back to America. We ended up going from there to Turkey, and we spent several years there. And that was different in the sense that it wasn't like our first country where we had all these glamorous expectations. We really had a better sense of this is temporary, and this is how, this is some of the specific ways that we're going to serve. So we really, I'm already in my late 40s at that time. And so I already had a sense of I can't do everything, or I'm not going to be effective at doing everything. And in transition, God was showing me what I'm most drawn to, what I'm most passionate about, and so I think that some of those areas of aha moments, oh yeah, I could be really effective if I focused my time and energy on this. So that season in Turkey was just a few years of trying my best to focus on what I was doing, what I could do well, and what was really on my heart to do. But it wasn't easy because transition is transition. So we 3 years in Turkey were just enough for us to get our feet wet, and then we're thinking about another transition back to the U.S.
Wow. As you were telling that story, Tim, it's this idea popped up in my head. Let's see what you think about it, that we move from one thing to the next. Sometimes there's a big question mark, like what's next? We have a direction, we make some progress toward it. And almost the moment we arrive at the new place or season, it's the process of letting go begins all over again. It's a funny thing. What do you think?
Oh yeah, Mark, definitely. I think so. And I think even if you're not moving somewhere, geographically, you're not making a move, even within what, where you're living and serving and working, there's shifts, and you have to pivot. And I would hope that I've along the way, I've picked up some tools, as I'm sure you have, in terms of how to get clarity in those times when can be confusion, there can be disappointment along the ways. I remember some of the signals of transition can be unmet expectations in terms of disappointing conversations that don't always go your way. There were things I wanted that I didn't get. And I realized that that's not necessarily me digging my heels in and saying, I need to fight for this. Is this what I want? This is something maybe God is saying I'm actually showing you that this is a closed door.
So that this issue of letting go and the transitions and holding things loosely. I don't know about you, Tim, but I have discovered as I've matured in life and age and so forth, that what seemed to be long lasting is more and more things just seem temporary, because really and truly they are. And sometimes that helps with taking the fear of the unknown, the uncertainty, because whatever we're moving through in a certain season, it's for a reason, but it is temporary in this life. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm in agreement there, Mark. I think that maybe as I've gotten older, I've realized, boy, these are seasons that are very temporary. Even though we've had some longer seasons where things have not shifted as much, even when things shift more frequently, I feel like that's not necessarily a bad thing. And I think that we're here ultimately to follow God's leading and get clarity on what He would have us to do through process of discernment and just discovering along the way where He's leading us. And I think I came back full circle, and I didn't share this, but I would like to share it real quick. Going back to the beginning, where my wife and I were preparing to go to the mission field initially, and there was a verse in in Genesis chapter 12, verse 1, where God called Abram and He said, leave your country and your people and go to the land I will show you. And one of the things that, one of the stories we continued to share about how God was dealing, how God was working in our lives as we were preparing to go to the mission field and talking to potential supporters and churches, was just how that last phrase there, that when God said to Abram, I will show you, He didn't lay out the whole plan, initially and say, this is, all mapped out and I'm going to, show it to you. Well, He said, I will show you. And to me, that meant along the way, I'm going to show you. And so for me, that was a big comfort, I guess you could say, and encouragement, knowing that I could trust him to lead me through those transitions, that he would show me next steps. He wouldn't always lay way out, so I could see the pathway ahead of me, but he would show me those next steps and be faithful to lead me to the places he would show me in the process. And so, and going back full circle, I think when we left Turkey and decided to relocate to the U.S. permanently, that was a big part of, we didn't have a clear plan. We didn't have it all mapped out, but I did go back to that verse, Genesis 12:1, and it reminded me of God saying, I will show you. Yeah. If we're open to that, if we're open to his leading, and in those transitions, big or small, we can trust that, the next steps at the right time will be clear.
That's so good. So in the last 5 years or so, since you and Eve have been back, what has God shown you? What does this land now look like for you and for Eve, and what you're doing and what you're looking forward to?
Yeah. Well, I think it's in a lot of ways was a pretty challenging transition. I mean, being overseas for almost about 20 years altogether, and coming back to this land of the United States, I think there's a lot of confusion at times. We'd been so long overseas. So for me, a lot of my identity and my sense of purpose, what my value and what I bring to the kingdom and God's work and God's people, a lot of that was really challenged through these last, first several years, anyways, of us being back in the U.S. In terms of, but it really challenged me and forced me to again keep sifting through the clues. What do I want my life to be about? What do I want my focus to be? So I was really coming full circle to that. Yeah, I know I trust God to show me, and yet I need to do my part in just really pursuing clarity and looking for the opportunities but again, the surprises were there too. Ended up, knocking on a few doors when we first came back to the U.S. and needing to, put food on the table, so to speak. There was a real pressure on me. I felt a real pressure, and it was kind of self-induced. I was, trying to make things happen. And I think that's a big temptation in transition, to try to make things happen. And for me, I was trying to do that and knocking on doors, but they weren't opening. The ones that I thought would be good opportunities and good fits didn't seem to budge in terms of opening up. And so I got some really good advice from somebody as I was having a conversation with a guy and a friend and a colleague, and he said, "How long have you been doing this? Overseas, all these years overseas, and what was this transition like?" He began to ask me some questions, and he said, "What would you think about taking some time to breathe?" And that really spoke to me, and really made me realize that I needed to let go of what I was trying to push as what I thought was God's agenda, but or what I wanted to be God's agenda. It wasn't in the end. It was my agenda, really helped really push me to let go, to take some time. It was at least a month, maybe more, of just not actively pursuing anything, but just pausing, breathing, taking in the view. And at that time, things began to open up that I didn't actually have to, I didn't have to, in my own effort, go after, So one surprise was I got invited onto the pastoral staff at a church, which is our home church here in Northern California, and was doing that and was the executive pastor there for 3 years, just up until the end of this past year, doing that. And that was a total surprise. I never thought I would be in a pastoral role. And yet, as a coach who also has a pastor's heart, it was a good fit for me and a real gift that the Lord gave me without me even actually really pursuing it.
Yeah, surprises, transitions,
Surprises. Yeah.
navigate through all this. In addition to this wonderful podcast that I know has helped so many, just to identify with the fact that, hey, it's not easy making change. It's a process, it's a journey. Sometimes it's pretty clear, other times it's pretty foggy, but we're fellow sojourners, if you will. What kind of work are you doing now, and what kind of work is Eve doing now? And the fact that y'all used to be on the mission field as a Christian, you're always on mission. But how would you describe your work now?
The last several years that we were overseas and doing our work there, it was very much involved in what some people might call member care, soul care. So we were coming alongside missionaries for the most part who were in transition. They were coming and going. They were in crisis. They were dealing with some kinds of trauma. They were having team issues, team conflict. So lots of transition, lots of change, lots of unmet expectations as well. So in my coaching, I was working mostly one-on-one with missionaries. In my wife and what she was doing with counseling, she was working a lot with a lot of missionaries, and sometimes together we would work with teams through transition and change. And so we were doing a lot of that, and we knew that that's one thing we knew that part of what we did was going to carry over into our next season overseas. We didn't realize that there were other things that would be happening around us, like the need to support aging parents and this pastoral role at the church that I mentioned. So there were other things, but what we really knew was that in some way we wanted to continue to be involved in this soul care space. And so what happened was we got back, and I just began to develop my coaching practice, and my wife began to develop her counseling practice, and that's what we do. And so a lot of our work is separate. For me personally, I work with a big percentage of my clients are missionaries and ministry leaders, which I love. That's the space I most definitely love the most. But I also love working with just about anybody who's in transition. And so I work with people in transition who want to get clarity and navigate the transition, get more confidence and clarity in a transition season. And that's what I love to do. And I love the one-on-one piece or couples work as well. I do some debriefing coaching as well with missionaries who are coming back to the field and need some support in processing what's been and what's next and how to navigate all of that. And one thing we're doing together, which has been a lot of fun, and we just started this, is retreats. We used to do retreats on the field, but my wife and I are able now to facilitate soul care retreat. Kind of how we've navigated some of this and are continuing to navigate it. And it's been a lot of fun because it provides the focus, the platform of coaching, and the retreats provide a focus that is a space I just love to be in.
Yeah, man, Tim and Eve still on mission, just a different application now.
Still on mission. Yeah, we're missions is part of our DNA. That'll always be so much a part of who we are and what we bring.
And that's so important as a reminder to all of us who are listening, that calling is over a lifetime and can manifest itself in different expressions of that calling. And you and Eve certainly have demonstrated that. Anything else, Tim, that we haven't discussed or that you would like to say that you think is important?
No, I mean, just this last thing you just said, Mark, I think is so true. And there's a lot of confusion around this area of calling, because especially for those of us who maybe are transitioning out of a long season of being known as, and you name the title or the position or the profession, and some of the disappointment that comes from, man, if I'm not doing this, then maybe I'm out of God's will, or some of the confusion around that. Maybe I'm not following his call. Well, like you just said, calling takes on different expressions and manifests itself differently through our lives, through the seasons of our lives. And part of our calling now is expressing itself not just in what we do as a coach and a counselor, but also as faithful to support our aging parents in this season of life and other areas that we're doing. So I think just thinking of that holistically also helps.
Well said. Well said. Tim, this has been awesome. Thank you for the opportunity to be the host on your podcast. And I'm going to take the opportunity now to hand the mic back to you and say, it's your podcast, Tim. How would you like to end it?
Oh, you put me on the spot, Mark. I thought you were going to wrap this all up and put a nice little bow on it. Oh, man. Well, if I would say that all of our listeners out there, if you want a great coach in helping you navigate transition, look up Mark Ross. Would that be deflecting?
Hey, I receive it. Thank you.
I like to. That's why I interview people on my podcast, so I don't have to talk about myself, Mark.
I didn't do it for that purpose, but yeah, I'll take whatever you want to give. Thank you.
Yeah, Tim. Well, I do appreciate you, Mark, as a friend, a colleague, and a coach, and personally how you've helped me navigate a lot of my transition in this season of life. So I would say to our listeners, look up Mark Ross. And go back, and I will put this back on you, Mark. Tell our listeners how they can find you.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. My name is Mark Ross. You can look up Next Thing Coaching or Next Thing Group, and I'm easily found. If I also am an artist, so Next Thing Art on Instagram, and Mark at nextthinggroup.com. Anyone interested? Tim is an awesome coach as well. I'm telling you, and y'all know that. But we all have a different fit for different seasons and different people. But that's how you can contact me. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Mark, so much. I appreciate you. And we got to do this again sometime.
All right. It's a wrap.
All right. Talk to you later.
Okay.
As we wrap up this episode of Navigate, I'd like to invite you to check out my Tools for Transition virtual workshop, which I'll be facilitating live via Zoom this summer. Actually, the workshop will be repeated 4 times, so you're sure to find a spot that fits into your schedule. I've created this to support anyone navigating a transition, which we all know can be quite complex at times. Whether it's a ministry or career shift, a geographical move, or some other life situation which triggers a transition, they can be tricky. So head over to my website, encompasslifecoaching.com, and click workshops in the upper right corner of the page, and that will take you to where you can learn more about the workshop and how to register. And we have a special offer for you, our podcast listeners. Use the discount code NAVIGATE to get 50% off the registration fee. Thanks for joining Mark Ross and me today for this episode of Navigate Podcast. I hope this has been helpful to you, and if it has, would you mind rating the podcast, writing a review, and sharing on social media? And of course, you can always subscribe so that you're sure to get in on the next episode. And I'll catch you next time.